We're going to record this for posterity. Yeah, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Let's maybe we'll wait one more minute to see if anyone else joins, and then we'll get started. If you have questions, you all are the first ones here. You can, and I encourage you, please add them to the chat, and then also you could let me know if you want to just ask it directly. I'm like the MC. So I'll be the person who's sort of like organizing who asks questions when, or if you could just type your question into the chat and I'll read it for you and, pass it to Phillip. So yeah, whichever you prefer, just let me know if you want me to read it or if you want to ask it yourself, and I'll MC accordingly. Yeah, welcome everyone. Okay. So I think that looks like the room is stabilized. I think we should get started. Thank you, Phillip. That was remarkable. I mean, what an incredibly brilliant film, and speaks to so much that we're still talking about, we're still thinking about. So thank you for being here. Did you want to maybe share a little bit about the process and the making of the film?
Well, first, sure. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, by the way, and I'm a graduate of Los Angeles Valley College, and my uncle Fernando taught at Los Angeles City College, and he died this year. So I think about him a lot right now, and I think about how valuable the community colleges are to our nation and to me personally, and so it means a lot for me to be here. A few remarks. This film was made not scripted. It was made spontaneously. It was a product of an investigation. In the world of non-white people, and specifically in this Mexican American film, there were no resources. There were literally a couple of pictures of Ruben Salazar and the articles from the LA Times that we started with. There was no data, and we had to sue the sheriff department for the data, for the homicide files, and we're successful. And so we were really flying blind. Without that data, this would have been a much lesser film, and I would have been hanging out there. But found his family, found the guy that shot them, the weapon, found a lot of people, and found lots of artifacts and archival materials in people's garages, and people's leftover, people forgotten. And stories that aren't valued by the general culture aren't, those artifacts aren't fetishized, aren't kept, aren't archived. So the work is pretty substantial in trying to tell a story like this. I mean, I made the film really, it was motivated by love and hate, right? Your love for your people, love for your parents and that generation of Mexican Americans that were underappreciated and under the radar, but had very real lives. I lived in a house raised by a couple of them and raised by a bunch of them. And also anger, that stories like this are such treasures, were considered by the gatekeepers, the cultural gatekeepers, to be, I was told quite blatantly by Ford Foundation, some other East Coast people, this was a regional story, this was an ethnic story, it wasn't an American story, it wasn't a story worthy of national attention. And so, that anger kept me going and kept me see through the project. Also curious, just make a documentary. You don't have a script, you don't know what you're going to get. It could be an absolute disaster. You've got to kind of pick up all the materials and all the characters on the fly, and you make do with what you're able to accumulate. So like a crow flying around town, looking for shiny objects, place things to build your nest down, and then you've got to make a beautiful nest, right? Artful and communicative. So I guess I mean, there's so many things. The Salazar story was kind of a mythology. It was left over. The Chicanos. What was curious about the story in some ways that he was a middle-class guy, right? He was a middle-class professional guy. He was a veteran of the Korean conflict, Korean War. He really wasn't the same generation as those Chicanos, right? He was older and he was more settled, and he was married to a white widow, and he was living in Orange County. So he was a different breed. So And yet the paradox is he's the only really one. He was the known guy that gets killed in the movement. And that was a real contradiction for the Chicanada, because they had to appropriate somebody. They used this middle-aged guy as the bloody flag of the revolution, even though he wasn't a part of it. He was a mere observer. And so I kind of always felt a little comfortable with that and really wanted to dig out who he was. And again, because my parents were, middle-class people, and because I thought they were really interesting and fucked up and smart and fine, I knew that there was a Ruben Salazar somewhere that would really been revealing about what was like to be a Mexican American in California, in Los Angeles at that time. And I think the film accomplishes that. So whatever else the film does is for the audience to tell me and to talk about. And so I'm here really, once again, curious, wanting to know, wanting to learn from you all, and really eager to have a conversation. So thanks once again to the organizers and each and every one of you for attending tonight. I appreciate you greatly. So what can we talk about? Anybody have any ideas, questions, thoughts, provocations?
Yeah, there are some questions. Laurel, did you want, and also my condolences to you. I'm sorry for your loss.
Oh yeah, well, he had a good one. He smoked a lot of weed and enjoyed his hot tub and his ladies. And, he was a good man.
Hey, that's what we all hope for, right?
Yeah.
Laurel, did you want to go ahead and?
Okay, well, I actually thank you so much again, and we're really proud of our journalism program at LA City College, and we are also very proud of our cinematography program at LA City College. And I had two questions that I typed into the chat. The first was sort of about the film, and the second was sort of about you. So I'll start with the second one, which was, can you please tell us a little more about your background? I don't know much about you as the filmmaker, or do you have a journalism background? Did you have a cinema background? How did you sort of come to this? And I mean, we saw that you had done some additional films, but please tell us a little bit about what
Sure.
brought you to having this career. And then I'll go to the second question. If you
I think that at some point in my college education, I realized that I didn't want to play it straight. I thought I was going to be a lawyer or something, right? And I just looked around, and I looked at lawyers, and I said, I don't know, it looks pretty serious, pretty grim. They got nice cars and nice ties. I thought that was really appealing. But I looked closer at their lives and the ache in their eyeballs, and I thought, no, maybe not. So I realized I wanted to play around, have fun with my friends for a living. And so I wanted to find something that also express things. So I didn't I was always moved me that Communist Manifesto bit, and the notion of being alienated from your labor. I didn't want to be alienated from my labor. So I wanted to be, I felt like I could develop myself, and I'm enough of a, egotist. So I wanted to kind of express myself, be in myself, and make a living. And this career, but ultimately, yes, so I come upon, I was stumbling around in graduate school at UCLA and took a class in ethnographic film, which is little Super 8 explorations. And I loved it. I mean, I loved it like I'd never loved anything. And it was very clear to me that this is what I'd like to do. The professor took me aside and said, this is a very difficult career. If you can think of anything else, astronaut, roofer, male prostitute, anything you can think of, it will be easier than this. And nevertheless, I'm a foolhardy person and stubborn, and I persisted. And it's a very difficult thing to do, but it's also very, 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 very satisfying when you do it right. And even when you do it wrong, you have respect for yourself for having tried. So that's the second question.
Yeah, the first question I had written was there an autopsy for Salazar?
Oh, yes.
Did the family request one? Were the records ever,
Yes.
and was he cremated? Were they able to do a second autopsy or anything like that? So if you could just address that.
Yes, of course. Yes, it was a celebrated death. Right? It was a controversial death. It was in the newspapers a lot, and the coroner at the time was a celebrity coroner. There was, the city was had so much violence, and so public violence, right? The Manson murders, Bob Kennedy, et al. And so oddly enough, the coroner became rather a celebrity himself, a guy named Thomas Noguchi. And so he was convened, of course, and his staff to do a thorough autopsy, and the autopsy was part of the records in the homicide records that we did review. And we reviewed bodies of the corpse, if other images of the corpse. So as to him being, he was not cremated, he was buried, and lies somewhere in the hills of Orange County, looking at the oil spill of Huntington Beach, I suspect. So yes.
But it did the projectile hit him? I mean, what
Hit him in the
caused
head.
it?
Hit him in the head. Yeah, the projectile had a little fin on it, like a little rocket, and it tore, a good portion of the side of his head off. So it was gruesome, and that took him out, no doubt about it.
Wow, ouch. There's a lot of questions. There's
Let's go.
from Chris, who asked me to read it, so I'm going to read it. I'll be the interlocutor. Did Reuven have the loss of his identity from the beginning, and then he followed up? Chris wrote a second part, like, did Mr. Salazar know that playing both sides may end up risking his life, maybe his family life?
Well, as for identity is always a complicated thing for everybody, right? I mean, it's a process. Nobody given an identity, you find it, and you can certainly inherit certain traits or certain beliefs or certain traditions from your people, and then your life ends up being kind of, I think, trying to sort out your relationship between that and the person that you actually feel yourself to be and who it is you want to become. So that's an ongoing process, hopefully, if you're still living, if you're still moving. The second one, bifurcated identity, I think that, because I'm not sure if it's true, but some people believe that there are no two nations that share a border that have more dissimilar cultures than the Mexican and the North American and the Yankee. And so the Mexican-American project is a pretty tricky one. It's you've got to assimilate. You've got one piece of information about something, and you've got another about another, and so it becomes a challenge, a great opportunity too, depending on how well you are and how much information you have. But the danger didn't come from his identity. Danger came from fucking with police, right, or investigating them and asserting his right in his platform as a journalist to get in their face about brutality, and so that's how he got in trouble.
It makes me think of there's this phrase I've heard a lot from friends who are sort of first generation immigrants, ni de aquí, ni de allá, I'm here, not from there. A sort of a way to talk about that.
Well, it's one way to talk about it. Certainly you're neither here nor there, but you're both things too. And that's, you also want to think about it as an advantage. Mm-hmm. If you're well, and if you're thinking about it well, and if you learn something, these influences, these two different distinct cultures can really make your life really rich. Mm-hmm. And so you don't have to play the victim card on that front. I think you're better off. Look, the people that I don't feel sad for them, fuck them. But these Trump people, these white guys that are so bitter, they have nothing. They have just what's on TV or whatever the OxyContin they've consumed. I mean, these people are bereft. So someone with a memory outside of this, that understands that culture and national cultures are kind of provisional and arbitrary, I think has a real chance to figure some things out. And pardon my cursing. I haven't been public for a while. I've been pandemic for a couple of years. Some muttering to myself. All right, so apologies in advance for the cursing. Okay, that's not right. All right, so next.
John actually had a question.
Please, Mr. Lightfoot.
Oh, he's saying move along. Okay.
Well, move along. Let's next.
Okay, give me a second. Let me cue it up. Actually, Lewis, wait, you? Yeah,
I was going to suggest that you read it.
Oh, that I read it. Oh,
yeah.
Sure, you got it. John wanted to know more about the man in the red vest. Should I imagine?
John? What would you like to know about him?
He's clearly mysterious and sort of in the background, and you have his voice disguised, and he's backlit. I'm just curious how you found him. What more?
No, he was the guy that reportedly told the cops that somebody had walked into the Silver Dollar with weapons, actually, carrying rifles. And this guy was a CB in World War II. He was a drunk. He had all kinds of problems with the law. He was also kind of a police ass kisser in the neighborhood. So he'd go and help the cops set up, with traffic control. That's ergo the vest. And he was a bit of kind of a mess of a guy, and got himself and got other people and stirred up something that didn't need to be stirred up. We found him. It was quite difficult, actually. He was not eager to speak. The producer Jennifer Kopzik found his children on Facebook, I think, and the children were, they were very helpful. They weren't proud of the old man. They obviously had their own relationship, their troubled. I don't want to speak for them, but it was clear that the guy's booze and other habits and illegal activities had a detrimental effect on them and the family, and maybe it was a way for them to exorcise some of their trauma, to help us and have him speak and go public. But the condition of him speaking and going public was that we obscure his identity. I don't even remember his name, and I wouldn't give it to you anyway. So we protected our sources all across the board. That's the answer. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, and I would just add, for any sort of emerging or student journalists here, I mean, it must have been quite the scoop to have found him and located him.
They were all scoops.
Yeah.
I mean, the Wilson, the guy that the deputy who shot the projectile, nobody had spoken to him. They had an LA Times reporter that was covering this thing for years, and he never spoke to him. He never found him. It's not that hard. If you're intent, we hired private detectives, and it's not that hard to find people. You can find anybody, and you can kill anybody, for that matter, if you really are serious about it. So, you can do a lot of things if you have gumption and you have will. And we did. We wanted to get the story right, and we did, I think.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking. Next question.
Yeah, that kind of dovetails into the next question. Curtis asks, what part of this film was the hardest to make?
The whole thing. It was all. I mean, raising money, money, going to PBS the first time and them saying, this is not a national story. Forget it. This is a Mexican story. This is an LA story. We're not going to give you money. We're not going to give you airtime. I mean, that's the story of my life, the story of the career, right? And then saying, well, you're wrong, and I'm going to prove you're wrong, and you're going to give me the funds to make this happen. So that's the hardest thing, always, the dough. The other stuff, hey, you had to sue the sheriff. We had great Thomas Saenz, the executive director and head counsel of the Mexican American Legal and Defense and Education Fund, who came on board and who pressed. We did everything. I mean, John, you playing with your, is this signals? Okay. And so, it was all difficult, but it was all, finding Ruben's diary. We didn't know he had a diary. Name it. I mean, it was all a struggle, but again, when it turns out well, the old Shakespeare line, all's well that ends well, that you forget about the hard stuff. And it really, it's a feeling of satisfaction of getting something right, of honoring your folk, honoring your peeps, and doing it properly and completing a piece of history. It's just, it absolves all the sins, and you forget all the hardship.
Yeah.
And there was battles with this network also on editing. I mean, there were ideas that some people that weren't Latino that had over there in the editorial department. And, I went, you have to fight for your film. That's really the function of the director. Fundamentally, is you have to fight for your film. There are a lot of people that worked on this film that have a lot of talent. The animator, the cinematographer is the same person, the editor, the producer, people that wrote on the film. There are a lot of people with a lot of talent. The singular job of the director is to make sure it gets done and to protect it and protect the integrity of the story against whoever wants to mess with it, right? So You have to do combat if you're going to get it done. You can't be a jellyfish, and you got to not be afraid to offend people. That's just, you got to be a, kind of an a-hole, which is probably my greatest only talent. Next question.
The talent, being direct and assertive.
You have to be assertive.
We have actually, kind of dovetailing on you mentioning that there are people who are wearing multiple hats in the production. Evan wanted to know specifically about the animation. So the
animation was done by a guy named Claudio Rocha. Now, as I said before, we had very little in the way of raw material. I mean, even after all of investigation, there is no Chicano, archive of Mexican-American experience. Doesn't exist. You got to catch as catch can. You got to find what you can find, little dribs and drabs, little artifacts, and you have to dress them up to make them pretty. You can make them watchable to make people want to sit and experience it. And Claudio, I've collaborated on many films, a dear friend, a great cinematographer, a Chilango, a Mexican-born, who prefers Chicano culture to Mexican culture in some ways, or rather, at least, really relates to the struggle, and really relates to the diasporic kind of popular class vibe that the Chicanos have. So he's a great guy and a very talented dude and a very smart dude and an honorable dude. And, he made those dead little pieces of paper look beautiful and feel beautiful and dance and move and dazzle. So that's his talent. Yes, I'm ready.
Yeah.
I'm ready for the next one.
Okay. Maybe I'll just read the rest. I feel like you answered it, but I'll just read the whole thing in case you want to speak more on it. The animated computer graphics recreation of the scene at the Silver Dollar was very
well, that's Claudio. Let me tell you how we did that. So the Silver Dollar.
And he's like,
Silver Dollar is like, I don't ever watch Harry Potter, but it's kind of dark cave, like in Mexican American imagination, where the martyr is killed. So everybody talked about the Silver Dollar, but none of us it's no longer there. It's like it's a record store now. Right? So because when we were successful in extracting the homicide files from the sheriff department, what we got these beautiful large format negatives of all the photographs that the sheriff took during the investigation. So wow, it was a treasure. So what Claudio did was the producer found a blueprint of that bar, and then did a lot of math I couldn't even imagine, and matched that blueprint to the pictures that we got, and he patched together and he created this virtual representation of the place as it looked, the dimensions, even the angle of which the trajectory was fired. So that's just the magic of movies that talented people can pull off. And it really all of a sudden something that is abstract and theoretical becomes something physical and emotional in a way. That missile shooting through that curtain, wow, the whole scene of death comes to life. And that's Claudio Rocha. Again, I recommend him highly. If you got a movie to shoot, hire him.
Yeah, that was incredible.
He actually be a great teacher at your school too.
Hey, that's a good thought.
I'm thinking, this guy's dynamite. No more honorable dude I ever met in my life, for real.
Louis, did you want to go and unmute and chime in?
Yeah, mine is, I guess perhaps part question, but more statement. I'd want to know if, I don't know the timeline of when the film was being made or researched and put together. So either during that time or after, my statement is more, the LA Sheriff's Department attacked a reporter, Josie Wong from KPCC, and which resulted in the governor signing SB 98. Excuse me. Did you notice the parallel there, or?
Well, again, yeah, the film was made a number of years ago. I don't remember what year it was. 2014, maybe. Something like that. So, and that was a time, presumably, when, at least that's what the hype what was going down, that law enforcement was more inclusive, more friendly, more something, right? This is the period, I don't know, somehow the memory of police brutality had kind of withered in the mainstream mind. And certainly, to your point, I think that it's quite evident that these abuses have not gone away. These abuses have always been with us, and particularly in poor and non-white communities. And so, yes, of course, the parallel is very clear. And we have to stay vigilant and not buy into the narratives that all is well and all has been solved, that we have Barack Obama as president, was somehow getting us post-racial or some crap like that, right? So the elites are going to sell all kinds of hustles, try to talk us into all kinds of quick fixes, but the fixes, the problem is long and it's structural, and one has to go about their business with making a film or whatever it is, with a sense that you don't trust them. We sued him. We shot the sheriff, right? And we won. So we went after him straight at him, and one must do this in order to, otherwise you're going to have to, basically I'm mumbling and muttering, but Josie Wong's case is important, and there were many more like that. And I understand there's also a LA City College a journalist that was hassled by the cops recently, and so yeah. That
was actually Lewis.
Oh my goodness, excellent! Congratulations. I mean, you're a cause celeb, and this matters. You have guts.
I've been hassled many times, but I shot the photo of the people being arrested, being hauled away. It was one of our reporters, Gigi, I can't think of her name, but her name was Gigi, that was arrested that night, along with the LA Times reporter. They cut him loose, but they took her.
Mm-hmm. Well, the great thing about today's era, obviously, and I don't want, this is another topic, but social media has made me aware of these things, those images like you've taken, that the people in LA Taco have been taking. We're hip to stuff that the public wouldn't have been hip to during the time of the LA Times preeminence, the time of Salazar. So anyway, that's a whole nother matter. I'm not an expert in that. So can we move on?
Yeah. Andy, did you want to? And yeah.
Hi. Thank you for making this film. I think it's really important, and I'm so glad you're sharing it with us. My question was about something you said. You said you didn't have a script going in. So I take it you probably just explored your theme, but at some point, did you write a script? I mean, did PBS let you have a meeting without giving them a script?
Oh yeah, I mean, I gave them an idea. I gave them I wrote, we wrote maybe, I don't know, 3-page proposal about what the story might look like, what the contours of the history were, how important the things were. You have to sell it, but that's not a functional script. That's just a brochure to sell a car, right? So you just sex up the story and try to get somebody interested to finance it. But the script didn't come until, the script is fundamentally, the most of the dialogue is generated by people that we interviewed, people that were friends and foes of Reuben and bystanders, colleagues of him. So most of the story's dialogue is written by those people, fundamentally spoken by those people. And then we supplemented it with a little bit of writing here and there to keep things stitched together, keep it coherent. But ultimately, no, we began with no script. Basically, the first day I think we did is go find somebody who could talk intelligently about Reuben. And you're also aware that these people are old and that their clock is ticking, and and they may have to be out the door soon. You want to get them in the can as soon as possible. And then you start stitching together and then have a sense of the general timeline of a man's life. Where did he start? We knew how he ends, and we begin with how he ends. But then, what is the spine of the story? And the great thing about biography is you have a spine built in. You have, the rise and fall. You have life, the birth and the death of an individual. So we kind of rode that one. But in themes, kind of present themselves later on, the things that are resonant come out of that are really meaningful, that are really resonant, that are said very well, that are politically appealing to me. Those emerge out of the interviews to a great extent.
Yeah, and the reason I ask is that because I understand exactly what you're saying. You go and you pitch it, and as you're filming, things pop out, and you have your basic outline because it's a person's life.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm being taught, like at Berkeley, that you have to have a dream script, like before you even do something. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me, and that, our Emmy Award winning professor who produces for Frontline was like, no, when you go into these meetings, once they accept your story, they want you to have a script, and that incorporates the words that the people are telling you. So I was just curious about your experience with that.
I've never done it that way, and I don't care.
Okay.
And so you certainly can, and certainly probably more efficient. There's less risk. I mean, Frontline wants to eliminate as many risks as possible. But then their product is much more, it's much more of a brand series. There's the same voice, same tonality, everything's subject to that aesthetic. And that's not for me. That's not for Chicano LA stories from the 70s. I won't subject myself to those rules. I won't subject myself to those people who edit Frontlines. God bless somebody who does, but I had a career. I wanted a career for myself where I wasn't gonna have my experience and my understanding of my own cultural experience be crushed and crunched and brokered by those people in Boston. No.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's appreciated.
Yeah. But you had to make a choice, and it's harder maybe, or maybe it's harder to go die over there, doing the things their way. I'm not going to do it their way.
Yeah.
You got that, so that's just me.
Yeah.
I don't, if you made a Ken Burns film out of this thing, or, can you imagine like making a film about John Coltrane by Ken Burns? I mean, you just kill the dude. You just kill the spirit of it. You kill the energy of it. This boxed, canned, boring, bloodless, and Ken Burns soaks up most of the money from the NEH and public media, and it's repulsive. You talk about white supremacy in American storytelling, American TV, in public media, it's alive and well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Wow.
I mean, I've seen the budget, and the staggering how much percentage of NEH media budgets goes to that stuff. I mean, and it's not suitable. It's not suitable. It's not doing the job that we need to be done. It's not speaking for varied communities. There's a little short guy in New Hampshire, little short white guy in New Hampshire, telling the stories of the whole country. It's absurd. It's an insult. But hey, he's got a bigger house than me.
Yeah, and it really
Smaller
does.
man with a bigger house. So now what are we going to do now? What's next? What's our next subject?
Yeah, so Kirk asks, I'm curious to know if you asked his daughter her thoughts on the two lives her father lived, from the anglicized OC suburbs to his reporting in the city, and if she ever connected with it. She sounded genuinely astounded that everyone at his wake in East LA were Latinx.
Yeah, sure. I mean, she was raised in Santa Ana, a suburb.
Mm-hmm.
And her reality wasn't a great deal of connection to the Mexican side, the people in El Paso. I don't know what his ongoing relationship to his parents was. He kept those people separate out there in the boonies. Well, Santa Ana is now more Mexican than West Los Angeles, I'll tell you that. Santa Ana is a very Mexican town now, but in those days it was just straight up white. And so that was her cultural experience. So she didn't have much connection, and she was a kid, to be fair. I mean, she wasn't swimming in Mexicanness, just pops. And so I think that all came as a surprise to her. And what was interesting about her, she and her sister, I think, it was curious to them that their father, who they knew basically as a white guy or a suburban guy, was all of a sudden this patron saint of Mexican Americans. And they were always the little fish out of water. People come up to them, oh, you're the daughter of Ruben. They don't speak a lick of Spanish. They're not comfortable and familiar with anything Mexican Chicano. And I think it was always a kind of dissonance for them. course, they lost their dad early. He couldn't have an enduring influence in their lives. Their mother was a white lady, and she went on. She wasn't making pozole for them, It was straight up TV dinners. So what's next?
Serena is next. Serena, did you want to unmute yourself? Also, I love that you keep the pace moving, Philip.
I told
Yeah,
you.
sorry, my connection is really bad, so I was hoping that you're gonna read it, but hopefully you're gonna hear me.
I can hear you.
So, you mentioned that this project started from an investigation.
Well, no, the project started because I wanted to make a film about Ruben Salazar. That's how it started.
That's what I understood. So my bad, but my question is, it's not a question actually, but can you give student journalists some tips on how you manage to gather all that information and how hard it is to dig the story behind the story when officials don't cooperate?
That's your job.
One of the things that she said was unofficial sources in the question as she typed it.
I see.
She said you also mentioned that part of the footage and info comes from unofficial sources. So specifically,
I mean, the official story was, the story that the sheriffs wanted you to know. And then when that's not very satisfying. If you want to buy that one, you're not a journalist, right? Because you have no business. You're a publicist, right? It's a whole different job. You're, a transcriber for power. And believe me, there's some high-paid transcribers at the New York Times that are transcribing the Pentagon's agenda and power's agenda all the time. So it's not as if you can't make a living being an errand boy for the elite. There's a whole bunch of them out there. I suppose to the students, I would say, be determined, be skeptical. When somebody says no, it doesn't mean I got a thing to you. Be tough-minded and take it as far as you possibly can. You make sometimes, you got to be unreasonable. It's just got to be unreasonable in pursuit of
I like that.
what it is you want to do. There's nothing. You're not there to make friends. You're not there to. I mean, one of the daughters of Ruben Salazar don't like me at all because I, took the story away from her. You make the story. I wanted to, take the story away from all the hacks and all the sentimentalists and even from the Chicanos themselves, and give the story back to Ruben. Try to recreate him the best you could and his experience. So decide what it is you're after, and then do it. And you're gonna be slapped around. You're gonna get disappointed. You're gonna experience all kinds of rejection and occasional bad feelings. But oh well, right?
Thank you so
I never
much.
got invited to the sheriff's softball matches. Well, now he's in jail.
But you're not gonna miss it though. So.
Huh?
You're not gonna miss it though.
Well, I know. Maybe it could have been great. Could have some great macaroni salad. I'm missing out on.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you so much. That's exactly what I wanted to hear.
it's my pleasure. Thank you for the questions, by the way. Haven't said that, but I appreciate them all and the interest. Who's next?
Oh, yeah. Next is Tandi, and they wrote, did the county sheriffs find that shooting blindly into a populated building was illegal or out of departmental policy?
Oddly enough, they did not. I mean, obviously, let's imagine that same missile going into a Beverly Hills haberdashery, right? Where the judge or the Riviera Country Club dining room probably wouldn't have happened. And had it happened, somebody would have been held into account. Probably they would have, they would throw the small guy, Wilson, the sheriff, the deputy rather, throw him under the bus. And but somebody would be held to account. In this case, absolutely none. Again, it's part of the contempt, I think, for certain kind of lives. That power still, that's the structural stuff, structural racism and classism stuff that hasn't gone away nearly one bit, I'm afraid. Next question. I hope that was satisfactory answer. And if it's not, follow up.
Yeah. John has a question. Did you want to unmute or should I read? All right, I don't see you unmuting. I'll go for it. John
I was
asked,
trying, but I was
oh
failing.
yeah, go for it. Go for it. Yeah, you're unmuted, please.
Well, I was just curious if the sheriff deputy was ever asked under oath if, as to why he was aiming at head level instead of firing at the floor.
His testimony was that he was trying to hit the wall, ceiling wall back of the bar. Of course, he didn't know how deep the bar was, and just trying to clear people out. He was shooting from down below. He crouched and he was aiming up toward the ceiling. He didn't ever look in. It was a very bright day. The bar was very dark. You probably need night vision glasses to be able to see clearly what was going on there, at least. Also, the weapon is not designed for, was not a missile. I mean, it flutters like kind of football, a guy like me would throw, a wobbly. It's not a spiral. It had a kind of, it was meant to disperse crowds, not meant to strike someone with any accuracy. So he had never shot the thing before. It was not a weapon designed for any hitting anything specific. And he says he was trying to hit the back of the bar so that everybody would clear out and come to the front. He's a half-ass guy, half-ass cowboy, knucklehead.
Well, and he's reflecting the fact that the LAPD and the LA Sheriff's Office used to recruit heavily in the South for officers. They didn't look local.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah, and they still, they still live in Simi Valley, and they don't live in LA. A good majority of them. I'm not a cop hater. I mean, necessarily, unless they're, they mean me harm, or mean, poor people harm. Then I am. But I'm, not reflexively a cop hater. Next.
Hey, Philip. it's
Rachel.
Rachel.
Hello, Rachel.
My question is, what is your most memorable moment during the making of this film, and what made it so memorable?
Oh, I don't know. Just, you remember the people you worked with, how terrific they were, how dedicated they were, how hard they worked, how tired we were, how united we were as a team, and their talents they brought to it. And every time I look at the film, I say, wow, God, you were great, Michael. You were great, Jennifer. You're warriors. I remember that. And I remember the people that we interviewed. I remember all of it, you just don't, and then you remember that your reception, and remember that we're still many years later showing this film, and it's kind of evergreen. It still works. So, and I remember Ruben, really, I get teary when I watch this thing still. After he dies and it's quiet, I get, I get emotional.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks for the article, Rachel. It was good.
Oh, thank you.
Who's next?
Gabriel is next. Gabriel, did you want to?
Yeah, answer. I can ask the question. How's it going?
Hey.
So you mentioned that the story obviously shaped itself through the interviews that were conducted. Does that mean it just so happened that through the video, it brought up the problem of blurred identity of Mexican Americans and the problem of assimilation and loss of identity? Or is that kind of more focused by you, or did you kind of throw that?
Yeah, I understood that. Listen, I understood that there was this murder mystery we had, right? And if you were lucky, you were going to find the smoking gun. If you were good, wow, that wouldn't have been terrific. But I also knew, let's be realistic here. It hasn't been figured out for 40 some years, however it was, and how many years ago it was ago. And there's another story here. Story of a man's project, his cultural project, his identity project, right? His struggle to find himself. Mm-hmm. And so we knew that hey, no matter what happens, this could be very rich. So I was very much curious about that particular thing, how he figures himself out. And since in the Ruben story, it's fundamentally, I think we pitched it early on as a guy fully assimilated, buys the American dream, suburban thing, and then in middle age, feels an affinity for the youngsters who are resisting the choice, the assimilated choices that he made for himself. And I think right there's something rich, right? And that's really kind of the core of the picture.
Yeah.
And then kind of being middle-aged and being advantaged, but still having a certain kind of feeling that something that's happening, that he's on this beat, that he didn't even want this beat. He wanted to be a foreign correspondent, go on from Mexico to Moscow or something. He didn't want to come back to LA and deal with these kids, these punks, these upstarts. He didn't want that beat. But now he's in there, something about their complaint, about their discontent, about their rage is tapping into his own narrative, his own personal life story, right? And that's rich. And so I knew that was going to be something. So I pursued those kind of questions knowingly as we went along with the people that would be able to speak about it, people that were like him, Mexican-American journalists that had to be going through something similar. People that had, the white dudes, they had no feeling, like his boss, Thomas, nice guys, but they didn't have any particular feeling or sensitivity to those particular, even his wife. She didn't feel it. And that's not an indictment of them. It's just they didn't have the same kind of dilemma in front of them.
No, I believe that. I mean, this is probably still an issue as I do more reporting also on this. Do you plan, since you did kind of guide the documentary in that direction also, do you plan on doing more work like that? Highlighting.
We followed up with a film about a contemporary of him, a guy named Oscar Acosta, and I recommend it. You guys have Canopy at LA City. It's called The Rise and the Fall of the Brown Buffalo. It's a really cool film about a guy named Oscar Acosta. As a matter of fact, he's in this film. The guy that's waving the magazine at Tom Wilson, he's challenging Wilson. He was a lawyer. He was an activist. He was a novelist. He was crazy as all hell. He disappeared off the coast of Mazatlan in 1974. I mean, a really colorful dude. And so the era is very colorful, and it's, again, stories that are now very resonant, again, resurrecting. I loved Judas and the Black Messiah, things like that, seeing stories like Fred Hampton, seeing those stories come now, they mean something today maybe they wouldn't have meant 15 years ago in the midst of whatever we were, Reagan/Obama era, which amounted to the same thing as far as I'm concerned. So I'm sorry, I'm giving a long-winded answer, but yes, I mean, it's an interesting subject, and there's lots of interesting subjects, and whatever it is you're passionate about, there's a million things to report about. And if it turns you on and you feel it, why not make your problem your solution, right? Make your personal problem your professional answer. That's the way I've conducted myself. And it's helped me grow up and to be a person that I feel comfortable with.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Next question?
Next question, I think it is from John, our co-host. What's the next project?
Oh my gosh, I mean, I've got a whole bunch of them. Whole bunch of them. I mean, I want to make a film about colorism in Mexico. Mexico never has passed through a civil rights era like the US has. It's a very white dominated society. And the Mexican mythology of mestizaje, which is this kind of states, which with people like Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera endorsed, created this phony notion of racial equality, that everybody's mestizo, everybody's cosmic, everybody's bronze. Well, it kind of worked on the public. I mean, all the settlers, the European settlers that come to the U.S., and it's even more for the Latin Americans. You got to figure these criollos, these Europeans who set up camp in Latin America and try to rule, they've got a big problem. And the problem is this: look, we're white, we own everything. And there's all these indigenous people. I mean, the Anglos answered it by slaughtering all the Indians. So, they just did away with them, right? But in the Latin America, they were more numerous by and large, and they incorporated them in their lives. They had sex with them. They procreated with them. So they still have this dilemma of how we're going to rule these fundamentally non-white people, many people, with us as white. What mythologies, national mythologies, are we going to put into play here, so to justify our own rule? So this is what's one of the films I want to make. It's going to be tough. Nobody in Mexico wants to make it. Nobody in Mexico will make it. It would take a person from the diaspora who's got all the advantages of a U.S. education and entitlement and a fat mouth to do it. So that's one of the things I want to do. There's a whole bunch of other things I want to do. You know, I won't live long enough to do half of them or even a quarter of them, but you got to keep trying.
Definitely.
If John gives me the money, then we can do a whole bunch more. So
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, we have another question from Chris.
Please, I'm ready.
The other journalists that Mr. Salazar worked with continue his mission working with the Mexican news than the LA Times, ? Did those journalists play safe knowing they might end up same as Mr. Salazar? Like, did that turn into sort of like a...
Well, that's interesting. I think that Salazar is the example of Salazar. However unintentional it was, the killing really had a pretty profound effect on that movement. When those kids, the upstarts, their army jackets, you know, and all their rage, when they saw that the main dude, that the middle class guy, that the guy in the, you know, from the LA Times got his head blown off, you got to figure that's a sobering moment.
Yeah.
And you got to rethink, is this really, is this all worth it? Is this what I'm going to do? So it had a pretty profound effect. And it was, you know, in that way, it worked out perfectly for the elite, for the city's elite. Again, remember the context. And the film doesn't say this, but in 1965, we have the Watts riots. The African-American community explodes. Rightfully so. Last thing that the city leaders wanted was to have a Mexican problem on their hands. And so some historians have talked about East LA as an occupied territory, that the sheriffs went in there just Rambo, man, preemptively banging people around and making sure. Another thing that the LAPD and the Sheriff's Department did was basically become intelligence agencies. They both developed spying operations. They both did lots of surveillance on activists. Regrettably, most of those files are all gone. Somehow mysteriously have disappeared in LAPD. I think they said flood. I forgot what happened to the Sheriff's Department's files. Those files are largely gone. But you know, they intimidated the hell out of these movements. And they got in people's heads and they made you feel like you're crazy. And one of the expressions that J. Edgar Hoover, who was the guy that effectively invented the Federal Bureau of Investigation, he was in charge for 50 some years. This guy was a creepy cat. And what his line was, we want to make the activists feel like there's an FBI agent in every mailbox. So they wanted to give one the impression of their omniscience, of their absolute, you know, ubiquitous presence. And they did a good job. They got in people's heads. And I think that Salazar's death and then, you know, the injustice that followed was kind of the coup de grace for a lot of people. You know, they went back to jobs. I mean, the elite has a lot of power at their disposal, of course. They have a lot of influence. Television, the movies, the soft power, money, and hard power. All the ways they can influence you. You know, you should read Noam Chomsky, you know, Manufacturing Consent. How does the elite keep this project going? How's it keep this thing on the rails? And it's an art form, baby. So next question.
Next, John wrote, I may have missed something. Did Salazar miss the Olympic massacre because he was in Cuba or for some other reason?
I'm not sure. You know, that's good. His friend Earl Shorris, who he grew up with, who was interviewed in the film, he says that Rubin missed it. I'm not sure he missed it. You know, that situation was very opaque. and extremely complicated. And the Mexican authorities are notoriously, unaccountable and two-faced. And it's hard to there's still disputes about this Tlatelolco massacre, how many were killed. There's still historians picking this thing apart. So it's unfair that Shores said that about Ruben. It works dramatically, and maybe it's true. So no, Ruben was there. He was there. He climbed into one of those apartments in the Plaza de Tres Culturas and looked around. But I think that it's hard to know what was in the minds of the LA Times. Certainly, they did need somebody on the ground in East LA. It was a developing story. It was important, and they brought him back to do it. It's fatal choice for him. But I'm not sure if Ruben missed it or not. I'm not. Someone should write about that. I'd like to know who got that story right. Oriana Fallaci, who was a celebrity journalist in that day, she got shot there, and she was hysterical. She wrote as if this thing was, the biggest moment, Appomattox biggest moment in world history. And I don't know how big it was. I don't know how dreadful it was. Nobody really knows how many people were actually killed. I think it's somewhere 80s or now. Historians are talking. Anyway, this is another tangent, and you get me on that, and I'm going to make everybody go to sleep. So what's next?
Beth asked, what was your main goal / hope in telling this story? And do you feel you've accomplished it?
Make a good film. And the answer is yes.
Yeah. I think we could all agree.
Thank you.
Gabriel, I think, oh wait, I'm sorry. There's a question from Laurel, and then I think our last question from Gabriel, just looking at the time.
Super.
Laurel asked, the Zoot Suit era was also pretty huge in LA history and LA Chicano history. How would you compare that era to the era that gave rise to your film?
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't. I mean, listen, if demography is destiny, the era of the Zoot Suit, I don't know what the percentage of Mexican Americans in LA were, but it was not, I don't know. I don't know the number. I do know that in the era of Salazar, LA was like 13% Latino. Now it's 50% Latino. So these are incomparable eras in a certain way. And I mean, the Zoot Suit riots were conditioned by World War II, racist Navy people, a whole variety of things. I mean, there's similarities and there's dissimilarities, but I'm not a historian enough to be able to, or knowledgeable really enough about the Zoot Suit era to be able to crunch that in a way that's useful for anybody. But I would suggest that you look it up and read more. And this, one thing, I'm reading a book about gay LA history, intellectual history. It's amazing. I mean, there's so much out there. There's so much to learn. I mean, because the East Coast has dominated, even, Ken Burns and the rest of them, they've dominated storytelling to a grotesque degree. And this is the most populous state in the Union. And it's the most diverse state of the Union and a powerful state of the Union. The fact that we're still kind of just barely introducing our amazing stories, it's ridiculous and unjust. And so I would say insist and just make them figure out how to tell these stories, because they're rich and they're sitting right there. It's like unpicked fruit all over the place. Stories that are just waiting, begging to be heard and seen. Exotic and exciting and powerful.
Yeah. Gabriel, did you want to ask our last question of the night?
I'd be honored. Thank you. So real fast, I know that objectivity was highlighted in the video. So I kind of am curious, obviously that meant something to you. How do you see objectivity, and how do you think it is being used also when stories are kind of close home to you, or if you're reporting on things?
It's such a big subject. But Ruben says that there was no such thing as objectivity. He was becoming very increasingly frustrated with the fact that his reporting was seen, being vetted, being assigned, and being edited by people not of his culture, that didn't have the sensitivities that he had in reporting. And he was extremely acutely aware that what it is he wanted to communicate was even made more difficult by the fact that there was so little in the way of support, right? Even and newsroom diversity is obviously still an enormous issue. And as for objectivity, it's obviously a fantasy. Everyone comes informed by a whole variety of desires and memories and cultural experience. So again, this is one for the philosophy class. Certainly it'd be above my pay grade as this one goes. I'm not objective. I try to be rational. I try to be a responsible reporter when I'm reporting, but I also have a lot of things that I get off my chest that I'm pissed about, that I'm passionate about, and I'm gonna get those done. But you don't want to be not uncredible. But then again, there's guys like Tucker Carlson, there's talking heads on MSNBC that are not particularly veridical, but they're still carrying water for the elites, and they're getting paid a whole lot of money to do journalism. So everyone has to make that decision for themselves. What are your politics? What is your integrity level? How many cars do you need? How many? I never wanted a Rolex. So it was never an issue for me to sell out those things. You got to figure out what do you want, man, who you are.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I appreciate all of you. Greatly. I've no doubt worn out my welcome once again. And,
no way. Thank you, Philip. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for your candor. I mean, yeah, and thanks so much for sharing the film with us. The chat explodes. The chat explodes with thanks.
I got to get out more, right? So see, I got a pent up guy over here mumbling away. But thank you all very much. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it a great deal. Thanks to those of you who organized this. Thanks to LA City College. Thanks to the Cal Humanities and all you fine people that have worked to make this happen. Thanks to all of you for being here. I like it a lot.
Hey, you're doing my job, Philip.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. You did it better than I would have. Yeah, thank you. And also, just so everyone knows, this will be recorded and posted to YouTube if you want to come back and get all the incredible conversation. Our links are in the chat above the thanks, as are California Humanities, who helped organize all the OV stuff. We'll watch that film together. And thank you to the NEA, and thanks to Rhonda, who did that incredible intro. And hey, I'll stop the recording. And yeah, thank you all so much for being here. And
we should also say that Rhonda is the head of our journalism program at LA City College.
Yes.
And our media arts area has photography journalism, and our art area has all the other arts, visual arts. So it's a big happy family over here, but we're also appreciative. I'm just an art teacher, but I love the fact that Kirsten typed into the chat that the film was supported by California Documentary Project, which is at Cal Humanities. Learn more, and there is a link there about how to get media grants. So hey students, hey journalists, and hey photographers, and hey, all you guys, look at that link, click on it. She's basically telling you one of the sources for you guys to get your stories out.
Go get them. Don't be shy. The worst they can say is no, and you go back at them again.
Yeah. Damn right. Yeah, thanks, Laurel. And also, I should plug, we have 2 more talks coming up. So if you follow us, you can find us. There will be a talk on Monday and next Wednesday. So come through, everyone. Yeah, thank you. If anyone wants
Thank you all.
Unmute and say
a lot of fun.
Thank you.